It's my great pleasure to welcome to our 2021 Online Trend Summit, Anna Taylor from the Food Foundation and Dev Sharma and Yumna Hussain from Act for Food. As a collective force, extraordinary young people around the world are mobilising and influencing tangible, positive change in our world's food systems. Youth across the world are rallying behind Act for Food, Act for Change. And the innovative ideas and solutions of youth must be supported. So we've invited Anna to speak on our behalf to Dev and Yumna whilst they were at COP26 about why the voice of youth is so important and how they've been working with policymakers and business to effect change in food and drink. Anna, Dev, Yumna, it's over to you.
Hello everyone, I'm delighted today to be here with Dev and Yumna. I'm going to first introduce myself. I'm Anna Taylor and I head up the team at the Food Foundation, and we've been working with Dev and Yumna for a little while now, and we're going to tell you a little bit about what we've been doing together. So Dev, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Dev. I'm a Children's Right to Food ambassador and an Act for Food, Act for Change leader.
Hi, I'm Yumna. I'm 17 from Birmingham and I'm also an Act for Food, Act for Change youth leader, and I've been working with the Food Foundation with the National Food Strategy.
So we're going to start where we began, which was with the Children's Right to Food inquiry, which we started actually in 2017, and our ambition was to really try and understand what growing up in Britain was like from a food perspective. And particularly to hear from children and young people who were in more disadvantaged circumstances, to understand what it was like in terms of what they were able to get to eat, how they felt about that. And we also did lots of policy analysis and looked at all the sort of hardcore statistics and tried to understand the situation. And then we published the report with a parliamentary group, which laid out a set of recommendations. Deb, tell us a bit about the Charter and tell us what you did as part of that work.
Yes, so the Children's Right to Food was really something different of its time. It was in 2019 where a group of young people came together to talk about child food poverty, and said this is really an issue at heart and we want to speak about it. And it was the first ever inquiry to hear directly from disadvantaged young people and to take those voices and amplify it in Westminster. So we, at the end of the inquiry, the young people who worked on the Children's Right to Food inquiry with the Food Foundation, we created a charter with a list of 5 items, 5 easy things that we wanted to show the government and say, these are the 5 things you need to change the food system. And we documented that and put it into a little pamphlet and delivered it to 10 Downing Street actually in 2019 when we launched the inquiry. And the whole point of the charter was to, in an easy, compact, convenient way, to show these are the recommendations that we've laid out from this massive report. And this is coming directly from the heart of young people, from young people. We are saying these are the recommendations that we want you to pick up and act upon to change our food system.
So in 2019, Dev, you were
14.
14. What was your most memorable moment from when we did the launch? Tell us what was your top story from that time?
So we did the launch, which was incredible. It was the 25th of April 2019. That's right, yeah. Remember the day?
Yeah.
It's a special day. So our celebrity ambassador, Dame Emma Thompson, came together with the young people and we launched the inquiry at Westminster Hall with Nadeem Zahawi, who was actually the children's minister at the time.
Exactly. And is now Secretary of State for Education, yeah.
So it was great, and he was really supportive. He listened to our voices. We actually had a private meeting with him behind the scenes, and then we launched the inquiry, and he gave a speech. Emma gave a speech. The young people came on stage and spoke. And then we went to Downing Street, and we went with Emma and the other young people to deliver the charter and the report to who was then Prime Minister Theresa May.
First of all, let's summarise what some of the main recommendations in the charter were. So we had in there that free school meals, which now just a very small number of children are actually entitled to, because it's on the basis of the income of your parents. But too many children were missing out on free school meals. We heard that from lots of young people, that they were in a situation where they weren't entitled to free school meals, but they're going into schools, they're in the school day and not able to afford the school lunch, taking in a very inadequate packed lunch or skipping lunch entirely. So one of the recommendations was to extend free school meals, and we had another recommendation which was to expand the Healthy Start scheme, which is a voucher scheme for families with very young children to give them access to fruit and vegetables and milk and so forth. Those were two of the recommendations, weren't they? And then the COVID crisis hit, and we knew that the situation for so many families was going to get a lot worse. For numbers of reasons, children not being in school, those children that were getting free school meals were suddenly not. Of course, families took a big hit in terms of their income, so many people lost their jobs and so forth. So we were really worried about the situation. So since then, why don't you talk a little bit about how the campaign has developed through the COVID period and what we've achieved through all this?
Yes. So children's food poverty was already an incredibly massive and vast issue back in 2019. And I felt that's why there was an urgency that we felt we had to act. This was before COVID, and you hit it right. You said it really well at that. As soon as the COVID pandemic hit, it just got so much worse for families and it exacerbated the issue. So we went into the COVID pandemic thinking, what is going to happen with children's food? I mean, we have a school food system which works quite well when it wants to. There's a system in place, and that's completely just been demolished in like a day, in a week. So we're like, what do we do? What's the alternative? So then we realized that the government were going to be giving vouchers to families over the pandemic and during the lockdown. But then there were, of course, obvious issues with that, and we saw that was only during term time. And during a time when there was unprecedented, economic change, people were losing jobs. I mean, the whole country was in a state of depression. I mean, it wasn't a nice time to be in, and people's livelihoods were at stake. People weren't able to put even basic food on the table or feed their children. And we felt like it was unjust and immoral for a government to not provide food to children, and this is vulnerable children, disadvantaged children, over the summer break. So we started working on a campaign with the young people. We spoke with our lived experiences, and to our surprise, Marcus Rashford jumped onto a campaign, and he picked up our voices, and he saw that this is an issue that impacted him. This is an issue that also impacts so many young people now. And he acted as a megaphone for our voices. He picked up the campaign, really amplified it. And what we did, we met the young food ambassadors, we met with policymakers, we met with the children's minister, we met with the health minister, and we advocated for this cause. We spoke from our own lived experience, saying how crucial and beneficial this £15 a week really means to us. Because at the end of the day, it was £15 a week. For a family of 2 children, that's £30 a week, £120 a month. Mm-hmm. And that really does pay the bills and get young people to eat a decent lunch every single day.
Mm-hmm. And then one of the other things we did during the COVID period was, thinking back to the younger children, is we asked a lot of the retailers, some of whom may be listening to today's session, we asked whether they would consider adding value to the Healthy Start vouchers, so that if parents came into the store and were spending their vouchers, they could make those vouchers go a bit further. Mm-hmm. And a whole number of the retailers did that. Iceland started that work and said that they were going to give everybody £1 worth of additional veg when they spent their voucher in store, and many of the others followed suit. So that was a great example of businesses really trying to do their bit. Yeah. What do you think? Did you think that was a good?
Yeah, I definitely think that when young people and businesses work together, you can definitely create tangible impact and tangible change, because these businesses, they're really massive. I mean, Iceland, Lidl, like these are really, really big companies, and we as consumers and as citizens, we should have the right to healthy, local, nutritious food. And I just going back to what you were saying before, I loved how the inquiry, it combined lived experience and quantitative data to actually show the government that, okay, this is what young people think, this is the evidence that's backing it up. What can we do now? How can we create change? And obviously you were speaking about before, the COVID pandemic. industry came together, businesses came together, local business, small businesses, you know, whatever size of the business you are, retailer, anything, young people, you know, people who work in the non-profit sector, third sector, private sector, they all came together, and it really showed that, you know, when young people come together and you're saying to young people, you have a voice and you do matter, it can make a really massive difference.
Exactly.
And so during that period, Yumna, you were involved in the National Food Strategy was being written all through that period, right? Which was, the government was asked for this independent review to be conducted to work out how we could transform the food system in Britain so that it actually helped us to eat more healthily and more sustainably to protect the planet and our long-term health. And you know, tell us, you were involved in that process, weren't you?
I was. So in the National Food Strategy, there was part 1 and part 2. And personally, I saw that food poverty was such a massive issue in Birmingham. There's a lot of single mothers in Birmingham. There's a lot of broken families in Birmingham. There's so much different issues, and food was always, you know, somehow linked. And I was like, okay, what can I do personally as a young person to get involved and make sure that young people's voices, one, are heard and not taken as tokenistic, but secondly, you know, young people are getting the food that they deserve. The UK is the 6th biggest economy in the entire world, and children are going home, you know, hungry. Like, they're actually hungry. They're being starved in schools and not given, you know, the adequate amount of food. So I, you know, was taking part in the National Food Strategy and led on a few focus groups and mobilised young people and got them involved. You know, start thinking about the key question is, you know, what does food mean to you as a person? What does it mean to your community? You know, how has childhood food poverty impacted you as a person in your life, in your family? And really get those conversations going so that we can actually start to create change. Because, you know, talking without action isn't really achieving anything. And I feel like the National Food Strategy, personally, it, you know, made me develop as a person, understanding more about, you know, what the food system actually is. It's, you know, when you tell people we're working on transforming the entire food system, like, it's such an abstract concept, like, you don't understand it. And so it was sort of breaking down, okay, what does the food system actually mean? Looking at it, you know, from the start all the way to the end of, you know, what are the different things that impact the food system and how does it impact you as a person? And so I feel like the National Food Strategy, the part 2 especially, I absolutely loved it, and I wrote the foreword on the young people's section about, you know, the National Food Strategy and how important it was to me and how it actually interlinks with, you know, the environmental justice movement right now, the racial justice movement right now, all those different things that are really interlinked. And I have a passion for all of them. And so educating young people and informing them about, you know, what are the issues in the food system was, you know, something that meant a lot.
Yeah. So now, Forward White. So the National Food Strategy came out in July of this year. The government's due to publish its official response to it in January of 2022. And now here we are in COP in Glasgow. 2 weeks when world leaders are in town trying to work out how we can make sure that the planet doesn't heat to the point above 1.5 degrees where we're really going to be in trouble. What's it like? I mean, how does this all connect to what you've been doing on food?
I feel like that 1.5 degrees Celsius, everybody's been talking about, but I feel like there is that huge gap between, you know, what policymakers are pledging to and what they're committing to and where we actually need to get. And I feel like that massive gap is not being talked about. And I feel like between that is, you know, the honesty aspect of our government. Is government being honest with us as people, as citizens? We have the right to know, you know, how does food system impact the climate crisis? We have the right to know. And the second thing is accountability. Is we need to hold government, we need to hold business, we need to hold industry to account to, you know, their policies and practices regarding food system. And I feel like, yes, whilst COP is really exciting, it's you know, I was at the protest yesterday, it was amazing. There's so many people turned up, and I think, you know, that people power of, you know, organising young people coming together, that for me was a massive moment. I felt like, okay, you're part of something bigger. It's not just, you know, you and Dev and other young people who are working on this. There is so many young people who are passionate about the food system, but they don't really know, okay, how does the food system link in with the climate crisis? You know, how does it actually link? Go on,
And
Dev,
how does it?
us,
Go on, Dev.
Yeah, so I think I was just going to say from there, I was saying COP has been so exciting. It's been incredible with youth activists and young people leading change out on the streets. But it's also doesn't feel like we've achieved something. It doesn't feel what it was meant to be. throughout this whole conversation, food hasn't been discussed in the conversation. Food systems change isn't part of the climate change dialogue. And like Yumna said, we need food system. We need to talk about food in our climate debate to really achieve climate justice. Approximately 30% of our global emissions come from food systems. Today there are world leaders talking about how to not reach 1.5 degrees Celsius and everything we can do to not reach 1.5 degrees Celsius. But the National Food Strategy and multiple other documents lay it out and say, if we don't change our food system and if we don't act upon our food system, we aren't going to achieve those goals that we set out today. We aren't going to achieve those goals that we set out in Paris. And this whole conversation that we're happening is just inaction if we don't also include food systems dialogue and food system change into the conversation. So it feels like there's been inaction. It feels like there's been incompetency in the fact that, well, leaders aren't able to realize that food plays such an integral part into climate change. I mean,
and at the heart of that is, of course, meat.
Exactly.
Because the National Food Strategy, one of the key goals set out in the National Food Strategy is a 30% reduction in meat consumption in the UK. And why? Because livestock play and the production of feed for livestock plays such a important part in contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. And meat's difficult to talk about. I think, have we seen that in the last few days?
I think we were in a panel and I think someone in the panel, a panelist was like, they said, let's talk about meat. And then they just put their hands up and we were like, don't know what to say here, let's move on. It's difficult because it's hard for us to speak about how do we reduce our meat intake? How do we as a country, we love our beef, we love this. How do we move on from that? And how do we really become conscious for our planet and realize that this is harming our planet. And there are so many aspects in the food system that need to change. For example, it's absolutely abhorrent that 2 billion people live in food insecurity in the world. Yeah. Yet this country, we have so much food waste. And I mean, food waste accounts for incredible amounts
of emissions.
And we allow perfect food to go to the bin when there are 2 billion people living in food insecurity. And this is interlinked with climate change. We can't have climate justice without food system change. And
businesses have got a vital role in driving down food waste, right?
100%.
And getting their supply chains so that there's not large quantities having to be siphoned off because it's been, mislabeled or doesn't arrive on quite the right date for the supply chain to be continued, and all the other reasons which contribute to pretty high volumes of food waste in the system. So that's a very easy, not that easy, of course, it requires effort and commitment and so forth, but a relatively easy win. But a bit harder potentially is trying to move everyone's diets towards more plants.
I think our campaign from the start and the offset, and it still is, it's always been about working together with businesses. It's been working hand in hand, young people, businesses and policymakers. And what we're talking about is systemic change. We're talking about people changing their behaviours. We're talking about societal change. And the only way that really is possible is by working hand in hand with businesses like those who are listening to us today and really saying, let's change we can't leave it up to individuals, the companies that are providing the options and showcasing the options, and you have to make it more sustainable. You have to make it easier to eat healthy. You have to make it easier to eat more plant-based diets.
Yeah, so taking it back to school food, of course, many companies are supplying the food which is being served in schools, and some of them are starting to think about, well, what if we took meat off the menu one day a week or 2 days a week and really worked hard to make those vegetables completely delicious and what the children and young people really want to eat in schools. That would be a great starting point, right?
Yeah,
do you want to have the last word?
Yeah,
tell us.
I definitely feel like school food is such a massive thing, and especially in the pandemic, for some reason it just went downhill. A lot of young people realised, and they were like, no, we're not having this anymore, because look, we're a generation that's been through economic recession, we're a generation that's been through the pandemic, we've been through a lot of different things, and all this time, the one thing that's been running through is the government inaction, the government incompetency in, giving young people the right to say what they feel and how they think. and actually giving them, you know, the chance to pick that healthy option, is to pick that healthy option that is cheap, that is accessible for young people, and localizing, you know, our food systems, and bringing people together. And so, yeah, that's what I would say on the school food.
Yumna and Dev, it's brilliant working with you. Very much looking forward to the next chapter of our work together. We're, I think, all committed to working with policymakers and businesses to solve some of these really big problems.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anna, Dev and Yumna, for bringing to life the voice of youth, your perspective and experience of food and drink, and of course your expectations of government, policymakers and industry to act as boldly and as promptly as possible. Once again, thank you all. A great pleasure to welcome you to our 2021 Online Trend Summit. Thank you.